In this section, we are going to talk about the div element. The div element is a way of logically grouping a bunch of other HTML elements, and as such, it's used really often in production level HTML and CSS code. We would think about using the div element anytime we want to deal with a logical group of HTML elements. Let's take a simple example. Let's say that we are creating a page which has information about all of Lunicorn's courses on Udemy. Here, the logical group would be information about a single course. Now, the thing about such a logical grouping is that other than the div element, none of the tags that we have seen so far allow us a way to specify such a logical arbitrary relationship. That's where the div element comes in handy. Let's say, for instance, we want a border around this group of HTML elements, and let's say we'd like it to have a different background color. We cannot work with the individual elements because we would like the styles that we are about to define to apply to a group of elements. The only way that we can achieve this is using the div element. Let's zero in a little deeper on how exactly the div element forms that logical group. If we look at the HTML that corresponds to a div element, we see that it is enclosed within a pair of opening and closing div tags. Within these tags are a whole bunch of other arbitrary HTML tags. All of those tags, everything which appears between the opening and closing div tags, constitute this logical group. And once we have an HTML element that corresponds to a logical group, it's surely not a great stretch of the imagination to realize that we can now style this particular group. How would we do so? Well, the usual way. We'd specify a class name on this div element and then go ahead and apply or create a style specific to this class name. And that's exactly what you see on screen now. We have specified a class name equal to course for this logical grouping of HTML elements. That's what you see highlighted on the left. And on the right, we have a CSS style which works specifically for elements which have class name equal to course. And within this, we can specify whatever styles it is that we wanted: border, padding, colors, and width. And at the bottom of the screen now, you can see how this logical grouping is represented in the browser. And we are just getting started on the full power of the div element. Like any other HTML elements, div elements can be nested one inside the other. That means that we can create logical groupings within other logical groupings. Returning to our example, let's say we wanted to group all of the reviews that a particular course has gotten on Udemy and style only the reviews in a particular way, style the rest of the course in a particular way, and have a default set of formatting for the rest of the page. Once again, we would create a div element, this time only around the reviews. The div element to the rescue once again. This time we will create a div element to enclose only the reviews, and that's what you can now see highlighted. Predictably, we will then go ahead and create a style which applies to the class equal to reviews. That's what you see on screen now. On the left is the HTML with the class attribute set to reviews. On the right is the style which defines how this particular div element should be rendered by the browser. Note that the rest of the course div element is still governed by the other style that we had created. And so when this entire HTML is rendered, we find that there is a nice outer set of formatting for the course and a nice inner set of formatting specifically for the reviews. You can now begin to see some of the full power of CSS and some of the full power of the div element. Let's return for a second to the style that we have on the reviews class name. It's possible to set the width and the height, as well as the maximum width and height, as well as the minimum width and height for a div element. These parameters will indicate bounds beyond which the element cannot grow or cannot shrink. This way, even as the page is resized or as the user zooms in and out, the size of the div element will still be constrained. Keep in mind that the width only refers to the content box. If you remember our conversation about the content box, the padding box, and the margin box, the width that we specify on a div will apply only to the content area. They will not apply to either the margin area or the padding area or even the borders. This can be important when you're trying to get some element to render just so. So do keep this in mind. The div element has no specific meaning of its own. It only serves as a container in which other elements can be placed if all of those elements together constitute a logical group. In this way, the div element can be styled, and that style can be inherited by its nested elements. There is one really important defining characteristic of the div element that you should keep in mind, which is that the div element adds a line break. In fact, this is such an important little point that there exists a corresponding element called the span element, which we'll talk about in a second, which does exactly the same thing as a div, except that it does not add a line break when it's inserted. To drive home the importance of this point, let's do a little example and reassure ourselves that the div element really does add a line break into the HTML. Let's go back to the very first snippet of HTML code that we had written in our first example. Here we had 4 image tags, one after the other, representing the images for 4 of our classes on Udemy. And these 4 images showed up in a horizontal row. The image tag is an inline tag. It does not insert a line break when it appears in HTML. And that's why, even though we had the 4 image tags in the HTML code laid out vertically, the images appeared horizontally. Let's now prove that adding a div around one image causes a line break to be inserted by the browser. It's very simple. We just enclose the last of the images within a pair of div tags, opening and closing div tags. And now when we run our HTML code on the browser, we can see instantaneously that the last of the images has been folded over, it has been wrapped onto the next line. So we have proved conclusively that the div element in fact adds a line break. Once again, this is an important point. Remember that the div element adds a line break. If you need a logical grouping without a line break at the end, use the span element, which we will get to just ahead.